The lake is screaming. A little girl is sinking fast, her small hand vanishing beneath black water. And the man who dives to save her has no idea the rescue will rip open the deepest secret of his own past. Before we begin, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment with your thoughts. Your support keeps these powerful stories coming. Screams bit into the summer air as the lake bucked and boiled around the dock. A lifeguard blew his whistle, shrill and useless against the shock of it. The small hand that had flashed up, the wet braid that had broken the surface and then gone. The hush a crowd will sometimes make when they witness someone vanishing in plain sight. Sunlight shattered over the waves. A red plastic boy knocked against a ladder with a metronomic clang, 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 like a clock that had no intention of stopping. Michael ran. He didn't remember choosing to. One moment he stood among the gawkers, the smell of sunscreen and gasoline sweet in his nose, and the next his shoes were abandoned and skittering, his shirt torn over his head and dropped in his wake. The dock board stung his bare feet. He barely heard the woman's voice. "My baby, please," as the lake rushed up and swallowed him whole. The water was a slap of cold. It clawed at him, gloved his ears, muting the world into a submarine throb. He knifed down, arms arrowed, legs scissoring effort that his lungs didn't have the patience to negotiate. Murk, suspended moats. The lake was darker than it had looked from above, green-black in the way of something that keeps its secrets. He thought he saw a flicker of white like a fish flaring, and then, there, a small shape that was less shape than absence. The outline of a child, limbed in drifting hair, little feet, little knees, no movement, not yet, not like this. He squeezed his eyes against the sting and drove deeper, feeling the pressure fold his chest, the world belling down to a single need, reach. He caught an arm. It was frightening how easily his fingers closed around it, how light she was, how she didn't fight. He wrapped her up and turned and kicked. His legs burned, something tugged at him. Her shoes, a weed. He twisted, panic flaring, and felt a soft resistance slither off his ankle. Up, up. His lungs announced they were done waiting. A filament of bubbles escaped his mouth and burned his nose. They burst the surface into a riot. Noise slammed him, the mother's hoarse keening, the lifeguard's whistle, the metallic cough of a motorboat somewhere past the cove. Michael gulped air at the same time he forced it toward the girl, rolling her sideways onto his shoulder and kicking with a violence he usually reserved for doors and deadlines. The dock slid toward them like a promise he didn't trust. Help! Get her! Get her! Hands reached, some sure, some shaking. He didn't let go until a firm grip came under her shoulders from a man who said, "Evenly, I've got you both." That steadiness went through Michael like a small electric gift. He hauled himself up on the next plank and crawled, then pivoted and pulled the girl toward him, because he couldn't put a patient between a crowd and a rail. A habit, a creed. "Clear space," he said. And even while water poured from his hair and elbows, the word doctor refit itself onto him like an old coat. "Clear the dock. Give me room." The crowd obeyed. Not because they were always good, but because people recognize a tone designed for crisis. Someone repeated it. Clear space, and people stumbled backward, knelt, pressed hands to their mouths. A teenage boy filmed until a woman slapped the phone down, shook her head hard and said, "No." He tipped the girl's head with his palm. Nothing. He opened her mouth, swept 2 fingers inside, felt only soft tongue and small teeth. Her lips were violet. Her lashes were stuck together like quick stitches. For a moment, the old tremor fluttered up his arms, a memory of doors closing, of a boy knocking until his knuckles bled, of no one answering, and he shoved it aside, heel of hand to sternum. 30 compressions. He counted in his head, not trusting his voice to hold. Wood flexed under her with each press, its roughness biting into his kneecaps through his wet shorts. Someone knelt near him and said, "I'm calling 911, and someone else said, "Already did." And the mother kept saying, "Please, please," like a person who'd forgotten all other words. 2 breaths. He sealed his mouth over her small one, felt the elasticity of a chest that ought to have been jumping rope and learning to skip stones. He watched for rise, It came, a small swell, a falter. He pressed again, the world narrowed to rhythm, to air, to the way his fear sat in his throat like a fist. Come on, come back, fight with me. A shudder flickered through her body like a fish under ice. A cough cracked open her chest. A thin stream of lake water spilled from the corner of her mouth and ran to the grooves in the dock. A sweet, wretched sound came out of her that made the crowd exhale in one rough wave. The mother fell to her knees so hard her palms smacked and stuck to the boards. That's it, Michael said, though he didn't know if he was speaking to the girl or to his own hands. He rolled her onto her side, kept her airway clear with 2 fingers, and watched the fragile sail of her back rise and fall. His whole body was a bell still ringing from the plunge. Sirens began in the distance, a stitched line of promise through the trees. He didn't look up. He watched her damp lashes, the delicate scatter of freckles across her nose that the lake hadn't washed away. He brushed her hair back because it was in the way, because it mattered, because people are not machines. Something slid from her fist when he lifted her hand to check perfusion. It was a small, squashed rectangle of paper, the kind that has been folded and unfolded so many times it is tired of itself. He glanced at it because he couldn't not, water making the image gleam. A boy, 10, maybe 11, standing on a porch with peeling paint, bare shin, a shirt too thin for the season. He had a scab under his lower lip and a look in his eyes like he had taken a dare and then discovered he liked it and then discovered it hurt. The clapboard behind him wore a number askew. The boy's hair was badly cut. He had a cowlick that did what it wanted. Michael, grown wet, shivering, went still. His chest gave a slow, bewildered lurch. The edges of the photograph blurred as if the lake had risen inside his head. He knew that boy. He knew the heat of that day, the way the slats had bitten the soles of his feet, the sound of drawers slamming in a kitchen that would be empty by night. He knew it because the boy was him. The sirens grew louder. Someone said his name. The mother's hands clutched his wrist, fingers shaking, as if to keep him from going under again, as if he were the one drowning now. Don't, she whispered hoarsely, surprising him with the plea in it. Don't take it from her. They wheeled her inside, and the swallowed them. Air conditioning turned his wet skin to ice. Antiseptic rode the back of his throat. Telemetry beeped in patient harmonies. Michael's feet slapped tile, leaving a dotted trail the janitor would scowl at later. He had been inside too many rooms where summer ended at the threshold, and pain lived year-round. He knew where everything was. O2 masks, nasal cannulas, pulse oximeters, a blood pressure cuff that always squealed and had to be coaxed. He moved through it like someone at home, in a place no one ought to be home in. Possible aspiration, he told triage. The words a rope he could hold. Watch for delayed complications. Keep her warm. Let's get an ABG, CBC, maybe a chest X-ray if her sats don't keep climbing. The nurses moved like a school of silverfish, efficient, attentive, their quiet talk a net around fear. They tucked warm blankets around the girl, lifted her chin, placed a small green mask over her face. Her lashes fluttered but stayed closed. The pulse ox register lifted, 88, 90, 93. Each number was an unspooling of a knot in his sternum. He was aware, underneath procedure, of the photo folded damp and ridiculous and impossible in his pocket. He had taken it. He had done exactly what the mother had told him not to. Even as he'd nodded like he would do the right thing, his fingers had closed and slid, guilt bit. He didn't care. He cared more than he had any right to. The mother paced in the doorway, salt dried at her hairline. A blanket had been put around her shoulders by someone with good instincts. She kept looking like she wanted to drop it and run. Then she would notice her body, the way it was the only wall between panic and collapse, and she would square herself and stand. What's her name? He asked a nurse, because the form had been filled by someone else while he was dripping on the floor. He surprised himself by not asking the mother directly, by wanting to hold her gaze like a door he wasn't sure he could open yet. Clara, the nurse said. Clara Hallowell. The last name struck a tuning fork in him. He couldn't place why. The resonance was soft and then gone like a car driving over a bridge seam. He approached the mother anyway. Up close, she had eyes the ambit of lake water where shade moves across. She wasn't trying not to cry now. She was exhausted enough that tears had learned to pool without falling. She held his stare without flinching, and he felt absurdly that if he reached out he'd find a kind of callous there, like someone who had taught herself not to beg. "I'm Dr. Carrington," he said softly. "She's doing well so far, Carrington," she repeated, tasting it. For the smallest moment, something like recognition forced itself through her terror and then was wrestled down. "I'm Anna. Do you feel dizzy?" he said, because people often collapsed after the crisis had passed, and because the question kept him on the merciful ground of protocol when the air above it went strange. "No. She looked over his shoulder at the small figure under blankets. "She's all I can feel." He shouldn't have asked. He did anyway. "How did she get into the lake? Was she alone?" "I was right there." The pain in her wince was raw enough to make him want to look away. "I was paying at the concession stand, and she wanted to see the minnows under the dock. She leaned and she slipped. She doesn't swim well, I thought." The sentence cast itself around the room like a net and fell empty. "It wasn't long," he said, though he had no idea how long it had been. Sometimes a doctor's voice is a bridge, even when it spans air rather than earth. "Thank you." Her hand jerked up as if to take his, then stopped, fingers fisting the blanket tighter. Clara stirred. The sound Anna made was half prayer and half instruction to herself not to move too quickly. She came to the bedside and a nurse slipped aside. Clara's eyes opened. Green, yes, and impossibly clear for someone who had been 2 minutes away from never opening them again. She blinked at the fluorescent lights like they weren't meant for her. Her gaze landed on Michael. She studied his face the way children do when they aren't afraid to be rude. "Hi," he said quietly, normal voice. "Not the crisis one. Don't talk if it hurts. Just rest." She kept looking at him like he contained the end of a riddle she'd been carrying. The oxygen hissed, its thin snake hissed through the mask. She tapped the mask with one finger as if to say, "This is inconvenient." Her attention flicked to Anna and back like a pendulum. "Do you know him?" Anna asked, voice lodged in amazement and something else. Clara nodded, slow as if her neck were made of dough. She looked at Michael and then past him as though there might be a doorway he would step aside and reveal. When she spoke, her voice was hardly sound at all, but purpose had been put into it like a note folded into a pocket. "You smell like river rocks," she said into the mask. "Like when the water goes quiet." Michael didn't know what to do with his face. He smiled, because that is what you do when a newly rescued girl announces a poem at your expense. He felt the smile wobble and steady, and felt hungry for it in a way that scared him. Some part of him, one he had not fed in years, leaned toward what she had said, like toward heat. Anna put a hand to Clara's hair. "He pulled you out, baby." Clara's fingers curled in the fold of her blanket near her chest. She seemed to be holding something invisible there against her ribs. She shut her eyes and opened them. "I knew he would," she said. A mini silence fell. The air seemed thinner inside it. Michael had to leave the room. Not because he couldn't stand it, but because staying was a cliff. He could feel the wet earth giving beneath. He excused himself in his doctor voice, and then in the hallway, put his back against the painted cinder block, and held it there as if the building might otherwise tip. He took the photograph from his pocket with careful hands, as if it were a creature he might frighten. Water had spidered its seams. The boy in it met his gaze without relief, like someone who doesn't trust rescue when rope is late. Michael considered that face. He wasn't supposed to think about his childhood at work. He wasn't supposed to have those old corners inside him light up like the map to a place he fled and kept fleeing. His mind tried to retrieve the photograph's provenance and failed because he had never owned a copy. He remembered the house. He remembered the shape of the number on the door. He remembered leaving through the back and coming around to the front to wait and wait and wait until the sun took a step down. And someone asked him if he needed help, and he said, "No, my mother is coming. It's fine." words on the back. He had been so stunned he hadn't turned it over. He did now, his fingers trembling. Blue ink bled from the lake. 2 words. He could make out the tops of letters, the suggestion of an E and an L and a Y. Someone had written something once that fairy times and pockets and water had rubbed down. "Doctor!" the charge nurse's voice. "They need you in Bay 4. He closed his hand on the photo and went. He could be many things in a day. He knew how to triage himself. Hours later, after stitching a boy who'd met gravel with his handlebars, after telling a woman named Rose that the pain in her chest was not her heart, but was a kind of heartache anyway, after gloving and ungloving, washing and letting the hospital leak into him until it diluted everything else. He found himself again near Clara's room as night shifted the pace. The overheads dimmed. Vending machines hummed with invisible, endless appetite. Anna stood in the doorway alone, watching her daughter sleep. Michael paused. He ought to keep walking. He ought to give them privacy. He hated obsession in colleagues. He recognized it, loathed it, distrusted it. He also understood how it can set its teeth in you the way grief does. She turned and caught him mid-debate with himself. She stepped into the hall and pulled the door almost closed, leaving a finger-width of light where mother and child joined the world beyond. "You kept it," she said. "No anger, just knowledge, the kind that lives in careless choice and careful consequence." He didn't pretend not to know what she meant. He opened his hand, palm up. The photograph lay like a childhood dug up in the garden. Anna's face moved through shock to pain to something he couldn't name. She reached out, then clenched her fingers and lowered her hand before touching it, as if it were sacred or hot. "She carries it when we travel." The words were matter of fact, kept tight to keep from smoking. "She tucks it into her pockets like armor." Where did she get it? His voice was quiet and could not hide the plea inside it. Anna looked past him toward a blank spot on the opposing wall, where a framed motivational poster had been removed and not replaced. The resident humor of the staff leaving a rectangular ghost of sun-faded paint. "If I tell you," she said, "you won't sleep again tonight, I wasn't going to." She pressed her lips together. "Then I don't want to be the one who makes your hands shake when you pick up a scalpel. I'm not in surgery tomorrow. That's not what I meant." She swallowed. "It will change you." He almost laughed, because that suggested he was a fixed object. "You think I'm not already changed?" "Not like this." Her fingers pulled at the hem of the blanket on her shoulders. "Tomorrow," she said. "I'll tell you tomorrow, please. Let her rest. Let me decide how to begin." He considered tearing the thin veil between now and then. He considered insisting and making a scene with a woman whose daughter had just come back from the end of the dock. He put the photograph in her hand, closing her fingers around it, surprising both of them. "It should be with her," he said. "I never meant." A sound from the room behind her cut him off. A stutter in a machine, a clatter, the rising sigh of alarms unfurling like flags. Anna didn't look at him, didn't breathe. She threw the door open and ran. The monitor's scream was thin and high and made to grab any heart within hearing. Michael's body went into that clean, swift gear it liked best. Fear channeled until it became velocity. He was at the bedside while the nurse's hands were already on the oxygen tubing, and the respiratory therapist was cycling through the quiet, shared language of equipment. Clara thrashed once, tiny and violent, as if inside a dream of falling. "Clara," Michael said, calm threaded through urgency, the way a kite string cuts a sky. "You're okay. Don't fight the mask." Her breath skipped, caught, wheezed. He listened for wet in the lungs, for that frightening rattle a near drowning can teach a chest. He heard something else. It was small, quick, a run of beats out of step with its band, a paroxysmal rhythm that flirted with trouble. It hiccuped, then settled as if embarrassed. He lifted his hands away, like praise might disrupt whatever blessing had just occurred. The respiratory therapist gave the smallest nod, the same kind he saved for miracles that kept their heads down. "Does it hurt?" Anna whispered, already pressing her palm to the crown of her daughter's head, like that would keep pain from getting in. Clara shook her head. Her eyes were huge and too awake. She found Michael's sleeve, caught it in her fist with the solemn confidence of children who have not yet learned that the world is riddled with doors. "They told me to give it to you," she said, the words fogging the inside of her mask. "Who did?" His mouth formed the question automatically, while the rest of him wanted to put it away, for later the way you tuck a note into a pocket to read when no one can see your face. She let go. They didn't say their name. He wanted to ask more, lure out the story the way doctors do, with questions that are casual and precise at once. He didn't. He checked clamps instead, read the monitors with his eyes. Let the rhythm take him. After 5 minutes it was clear the wave had passed. The alarms had been a temporary weather, dramatic and dutiful, squall and clear. "False alarm," the nurse murmured. "True panic," Michael said back. He stepped into the hall. A man from radiology pushed a portable machine past him and said, "You look like a lake, Doc," and went on. Michael leaned against cinder block again. He had never liked how the walls back here reminded him of basements. The thought of basements was a trapdoor. He backed away from it. Anna followed him out. In the hall's hush, with the vending machines paging their own tiny universe and an orderly singing under his breath 2 corridors away. Her voice seemed too loud when she said, "I can't wait until tomorrow." He looked at her. She pressed the photograph into his hand again. He hadn't realized she'd still had it, that in the chaos she had kept hold of it, the way a person keeps hold of faith. "I kept a secret until it began to keep me," she said. It didn't feel like a secret anymore. It felt like a punishment. He didn't breathe. Anna lifted her chin and began as if taking a needle and sliding it into a vein. Once there was a boy on a porch. Her eyes went not soft, the way a person's eyes go when they are being measured for truth. He waited until the light changed, and then again. He told anyone who approached that he was fine. He said, "My mother is coming." He said it the way a person in the desert will say, "There is water right over that rise." Michael didn't let his face move. He didn't need to. A neighbor called somebody who called somebody else. They came with clipboards, Anna said, the capital letters invisible and heavy. They were kind. They meant well. They took the boy away and told him there would be a phone call soon, and then later, and then later. The calls never came. Eventually, the boy learned a cadence of apologies to himself that tasted like it belonged to him. The hallway wanted a laugh track to make room for breath. It didn't get one. Michael stared at the shine left by a buffing machine along the base of the wall and thought of the number on the door in the photo, the way it tilted, the way it traced its shape with a stick while he waited. "What does this have to do with Clara?" He said because he had to stand on the very small island of his job while the water around it rose. Anna made a sound that might have been a laugh sharpened down. "Everything. Nothing. Ask me more questions and I'll answer them wrong." She closed her eyes. The lids were thin enough that shadow pooled. The boy had a sister. Something old and careful inside him tried to sit up, but was bound at the wrists. She was small. He told her stories in a closet when their father got loud, and made the house a place where air was scarce. She opened her eyes. He called her Mouse, and taught her how to make herself a shadow and a wind. He taught her how to climb the clothes hamper to reach the window latch. He taught her how to sleep without sleeping, so that mornings could arrive without ghosts still standing beside the bed. Michael closed his hand around the photograph until the paper clicked. The boy, Anna said, disappeared into other people's kitchens. Nights got longer. The sister was told 2 things that rearranged her brain. 1, that the boy had left because he wanted better. 2, that he had not wanted to take her. She looked directly at him, and the words came out with their skin off. Both were lies. Other people were more comfortable sitting with. He smelled the faint trace of bleach held in the grout. He remembered counting books, shoes, the dots on linoleum. He remembered learning the weight of being unwanted, how it made you shout and then made you quiet. You might ask how she knows these things about a boy on a porch. Anna said, voice almost gentle now, as if she were laying down a blade. You might ask why she held a photograph of him as armor for her daughter. She took a breath that was too thin and too thick. You might ask how she recognized the grown version of him when he stepped out of a lake and turned the world back on. Michael shook his head once, a small movement any casual passerby would miss. He wasn't telling her not to speak. He was telling something in himself that raced and wanted and flinched and didn't know how to open its own locked door. "Not yet," he said, surprising himself with the plea in it. Anna's hands pressed together like she was cold, or praying, or keeping herself from breaking. "I have to tell you one thing," she said, and the fluorescent light hummed as if it would weigh each word. The photograph came from a house with the number tilting on the door. The boy left on a July afternoon, and the sister waited until the porch turned to shade, and then to dark, and then to stars. A neighbor gave her the photograph later, said, "This was in the mailbox for him. Maybe you can hold it until he comes back." She was 6, and she kept it. And then she grew up and gave it to her daughter when they traveled. The earth shifted. He felt it without seeing anything move. "I won't say the rest now," she whispered. "But if you need me, I'll sit where I can see both the doorway and the window. I always sit that way, old habits." She started back toward the room. She paused and half-turned, as if remembering something she might forget again, and said, "The writing on the back says stay. That's what the letters are, S-T-A-Y. I checked so many times as if it might change. It never changed." He didn't know what to do with his hands, so he did the only thing he trusted. He scrubbed in Bay 7, then sutured a laceration on a girl who rolled her eyes with appreciation when he told a joke he had used 50 times and kept using because it worked. He returned forms to their folders. He circled abnormal values in labs with a red pen that made tidy, calm marks, like a person who thought dignity lived inside him. Not until the hour when the hospital is a different creature, where the night shift belongs to itself and televisions in waiting rooms murmur to no one, did he open his locker. He had no right to bring personal things into a place where personal things had teeth. He did the one unprofessional thing he allowed himself. He took the photograph out again and held it up to eye level under the lurid locker room fluorescents that make everyone look a little more haunted than they are. "Stay," he said aloud to the back of it, to the boy, to himself. Rain came like an afterthought. The forecast had promised heat and haze, but around midnight a short, decisive cloudburst knocked dust out of the air and left the world rinsed. In the ER, time does not follow weather. It follows pain. It followed a man with a sprained ankle who had fallen off a ladder changing a porch light, and a teenage girl with the glassy, panicked stare of someone who had swallowed pills to make the pressure in her chest stop and discovered a different kind of pressure, and a grandmother whose laughter during a sitcom rerun had cracked open a memory of an old grief so fresh she thought she was dying. Between cases, Michael would stand at the hall window, watch the parking lot shine like a lake, and think about a porch. He didn't go to Clara's room. He didn't avoid it either. He passed it the way one passes a house they grew up in, walking on the opposite side of the street, eyes forward, the foot that knows precisely how many steps it takes from mailbox to driveway, refusing to land on any of them. At 2:30, when the night had taken its deepest breath, Clara woke again. He wasn't there to see. It was a nurse who told him. Later, the way you share the small pieces of a story that belongs to someone else. That she'd stared up at the ceiling and asked if clouds ever get tired. That she had asked if her mother was asleep, and if it was okay to let her sleep. That she had said almost conversationally, "Did you know a person can sleep with their eyes open if they're a mother?" And the nurse had laughed because she had never heard truer science in an ER. He wandered that way because he had nowhere else to go. He found Anna dozing in a chair, her head tipped against the wall, her lips parted with the kind of breath that is not rest. Clara's eyes were open and exact. "Hi," he said from the doorway, so he would not startle the room. Anna jerked awake with the guilty, practiced lurch of someone whose sleep was never deep enough. Is everything just checking? He glanced at the monitors. The numbers were boring in the way he loved. Clara said, "You didn't leave." Her small voice hit him like a hand on his shoulder from behind. "I'm off at 7, he said lightly, and then wanted to take the sentence back and disassemble it for parts and rebuild it into something that did not make his throat close. "Do you know what this hospital smells like?" she asked, apparently possessing a census of smells catalogued for just such moments. "What does it smell like?" he said. "Like pennies," she thought, "and like the inside of a bandage, and like when my mom washes all the sheets at once, and the whole house is a cloud." He laughed before he meant to. He felt the laugh travel down a hallway he usually kept closed. "That's about right." She looked at him with that same serious, tilted attention she had at the lake. "You looked like you were looking for something that fell out of your pocket," she said. At the lake, he pictured himself bird-like, hopping around his own life, pecking for lost things. Aha! She held up her left hand and showed him the red impressions the rifle tape had made when she'd lain on it wrong. "Do you think," she hesitated as if offering something name might make it break, "can I ask you a private question in front of my mom?" Anna straightened, her mouth curving. "That kind of defeats. It's okay," Michael said to both of them. "Were you a sad kid?" Clara asked simply. For a wild second he wanted to lie, not to spare her, but to spare the boy in the photograph the exposure of the answer. He swallowed. "I was an everything kid," he said, the truth dressed in humor. "Mostly I liked pretending I wasn't." Clara nodded, as if that were a category she had read about. "I used to bring the picture to school," she said, and Michael's blood felt sudden in his fingertips. He kept his face quiet. "I'd keep it in the pocket of my jumper. My teacher said we should bring something to tell the class about what makes us brave." She looked at her hands. "I took him." "Him?" He said, "Careful, the boy," she said. "He looks like brave and mad, and I dare you." She scrunched her face. "He looks like he'd fight on a team of one and then win, and then be tired." On the chair's edge, Anna's fingers found the edge of the blanket again and worried it. She didn't interrupt. Kid said, "Who is that?" And I said, "He's mine." Clara narrowed her eyes at his momentary surprise. People can be mine even if they don't know it yet. He couldn't speak. He adjusted the nasal cannula because it needed adjusting, though it did not. Anna stood. "We should let him?" "No," Clara said gently, startling them. "Because then it's tomorrow and then you have to tell." She blinked slowly and looked at Michael. "Mom says time is a bus. Sometimes you need to pull the cord." Michael's laugh escaped again, raw and grateful. "You are an excellent human," he said, to a girl who had drowned and been returned with her language intact. Anna put her hand on her daughter's hair. "Is it okay?" she swallowed. "Is it okay if I ask for a little more time?" "No," Clara said, finally enjoying the power of the word. "But I will allow it." She looked at Michael, conspiratorial. 5 minutes. Something like normalcy rose into the room and sat down for a minute. It wasn't much. It was the kind of mercy that is a hand on your back when you're trying to stand. He leaned against the wall and let it hold him. A shadow slid past the frosted glass square in the door. Then another. Probably nothing. The hallway out there had its own weather. The shape returned and stopped, like someone reconsidering the value of knocking. A hesitant rap. Not Staff. Staff didn't knock like that. Anna turned. "Yes? Yes?" The door opened a hand's width. A grey-haired woman peered in, apology already in her face. "Sorry," she whispered, as if one could be quiet enough not to exist. "I'm a volunteer. There's a gentleman asking at the desk for." He said the Hallowell room. Anna went so still, Michael's eyes had to look somewhere else so they didn't accuse her of freezing. "What gentleman?" "He didn't give a name. He said he had something that belonged here." The volunteer looked from mother to doctor to child with the way old women assess rooms, like they're counting souls. "I told him to wait. Should I tell him to leave?" "Describe him," Anna said. Voice top of a teacup, chip already formed. "Tall, a bit stooped." The woman made a gentle measurement in the air. "Face like a person who has been out in the wind." He held his cap in both hands. He said please twice in one sentence, which is rare. Michael felt a heat rising. He hadn't felt since fights in hallways outside classrooms. He didn't like how quickly his fingers answered it. How they curled into the old shape that said, "Come try me. I can speak to him," he heard himself say, already halfway to the door in his head. No. Anna's voice. The shock of it deeper than its volume. She walked to the foot of the bed like a guard. "I'll go." "Mum," Clara said, reaching, her eyes two green anchors. "I'll be right outside," Anna said, with a steadiness that came from the last of her reserve. She looked at Michael as if he were the proof that returns could happen. "Stay with her." He nodded once. It felt like a vow. He watched through the door's small window as Anna stepped into the hallway and turned left. The volunteer led her toward the waiting area where a Coke machine sat beside a ficus that had been forgiving more than one administrator for years. The man stood. He wore a camo cap crushed flat in his hands. His posture held a lifetime of asking forgiveness from rooms. Michael couldn't see his face clearly from here. He didn't need to. His body was already a radio catching a station he never wanted to hear again. The man spoke and took a small half-step closer. Anna flinched and then stood taller. She answered without looking at her shoes. He held out something small, paper gone soft. She didn't take it. She folded her arms the way a person does when winter is inside a day. The man looked down at the offering and then up at her again and said, "Please, one more time," and the word traveled down the hall and into Michael's chest. It did not land soft. Anna lifted her hand. He saw, through the fogged glass and distance, the shape of a decision crest and break. She took what he was holding. The man nodded. He did not try to touch her. He put his cap back on, even though he had not left the building. He turned and went. He left at the pace of a person trying not to wince. When Anna came back in, her face had the tautness of a violin string tuned too tight. She closed the door gently, leaned her back against it and laughed once. The sound was hoarse. "I hate hospitals," she said. Michael kept his mouth shut, because anything he was about to say would do harm. "He brought this," she said. She unfolded a soft, tired rectangle, and then another from inside it, quadrants. A photograph torn and mended. This one newer than the other and older than them all at once. The edges fit the tear in a way his stomach recognized before his head did. She laid both pieces next to each other on the blanket over Clara's knees like an offering. The seam joined, undid, and joined again under the fluorescent light. The picture showed the house, the numbers tilted. 2 children on the steps. The boy, Michael, scowling and braced. The girl, small, dark hair in hacked bangs, eyes like traps for sunlight, leaning into him with the entire weight of her as if posture could glue 2 people together. In the corner, deep background, a man blurred by the cheap camera's depth of field. A shape in a doorway, one hand high on the jamb, a cigarette's ghost near his ear. He might have been any man he was not. Anna touched the younger version of herself with a finger so careful it might have been a benediction. She touched the man in the doorway with the same careful finger, and then held it in the air, like it had found something poison. She looked at Michael and said, "Tomorrow used to be far away. It isn't anymore. There are stories we beg to tell because we think speaking them will empty the room, and we will be left standing with a clean floor and a different future. There are stories we refuse to tell because we think silence is a dam that will hold back a flood forever. Neither is true." The room stays crowded. The flood learns a different way in. Anna spoke with her daughter's fingers in her left hand, and the photograph's seam under her right. She did not look away from Michael. If she had, she might have stopped. Sometimes in order to survive a story, you have to stare it down so it cannot stare back. "Our mother was named Evelyn," she began, and Michael had to lower himself onto the edge of the chair, because hearing the name out loud made his knees unreliable. He had not pushed it through his teeth in decades. Names are spells whether we believe in spell books or not. "She made bad choices," Anna said, without apology for loving her anyway, or good choices made at bad hours. "She left sometimes and came back with school supplies and 3 bags of apples she couldn't afford. She taught us to dance in the kitchen. She taught us to hide in a hallway closet when the car in the driveway belonged to a man who would go through drawers and say things like, "Where's my money?" to a person who had never owned any. "You," Michael said, because breath had returned, and with it a giddy, bewildered awe. "You were Mouse." She smiled like a wound learning to be a mouth. "And you were my hero who kept losing. And I loved you because you kept fighting anyway," she swallowed. He, our father, was afraid of the parts of the world he couldn't control, which was most of it, which meant he was always afraid. Afraid men like that become hurricanes when boys reach certain ages. You reach them. And she gestured both hands, as if shaping something awful out of smoke, stormed. Michael remembered a door that wouldn't open because it never opened when fists were listening outside it. He remembered the taste of the word stay. He remembered how it turned into worry stones in his pockets, rubbed until his fingers wore smooth. He took that photograph, Anna said. He told me later. He put it in the mailbox and addressed it to a woman's shelter we had visited twice before Evelyn decided she could invent a different escape route. He wrote one word on the back because he thought she'd see it when she came for the mail. Her laugh was short and furious. He thought it was a joke or a miracle. I don't know. He said if she read stay, she might. He said if she didn't, she'd know she hadn't, that he had proof love was a coin he was owed and never given. He was drunk on afternoons and certainty. Michael lifted the photograph's corner. He wanted to hold it and didn't want to touch it again. And the neighbor found it. Mrs. Newell, Anna's mouth softened. She put lemonade on the railing in summer for kids who pretended they just wanted to sit and not drink lemonade. She found it because the mailbox door stuck, and she had the trick to unstick it. She kept it safe. She gave it to me under a dish towel 2 weeks after you'd gone to a place with floors that didn't splinter. The sentence opened its palms and showed him everything inside it. 2 weeks of waiting, a mail carrier who was late, a woman shaking hands, a little girl putting a photograph under her pillow like it could glow in the dark. Anna took a breath. I thought you'd come back. I thought the world worked like stories. Then I learned it doesn't. Then I learned it might if you drag it. How did you find me? Michael's voice had slid lower, like he didn't want to wake large things. I didn't, she said, and the cruelty in it was not for him. I tried. I grew up. I looked in places people told me not to. I followed the sound a person makes when they try to swallow their own lack and pretend it isn't bigger than their throat. She tightened her fingers on Clara's knuckles, small bones nested in larger ones. I went to the lakeside fair where the man with the cap sells bottled honey and the woman with the long braid sells quilts with stars still sewn in. I took a picture of my daughter with the water behind her. A man stood in the background. Michael's hand trembled and steadied and trembled again. The doorway figure, he said. Older. In the new photo, Anna nodded. Our father, she said, releasing the word like something that had been biting her mouth for years. He is sober now. He told me in the waiting room just now. He said he hasn't had a drink in 11 years. He said he goes to a church basement where people say hello with their whole faces. He said he brought the other half of the photograph from a box because he wanted to use the only thing left that he hadn't broken to mend something he doesn't deserve to touch. She smiled without joy. I didn't forgive him, but I took the paper. Michael stood. He walked to the window and looked at the parking lot because he could not look anywhere else without turning into water. The reflection in the glass showed a man who had swum hard and failed often and kept a scalpel-steady hand through it all. He pressed his forehead against coolness. The hum of the building filled his bones. He wanted to be angrier than he was. He wanted to be kinder. He said he watched the lake this afternoon. Anna said softly behind him. He flinched. He said he saw someone run like a boy runs when he has a dare and a hill. He said he knew in 1 second what hope does to a person when it comes back. He said he wanted to leave town before he ruined it. He said instead he came here. He said he would sit on a bench until someone told him to go. Michael turned around. He's here. He left, Anna said. I told him to. He left like a man who has rehearsed leaving so that his footprints don't show. They were quiet. Quiet in the way of rooms that have survived telling. The machines hummed. Clara watched them both the way children will watch, whether for signs it is changing. She picked at the tape edge and whispered, "Is he my grandpa?" And Michael thought, "God, she is an arrow." "He is," Anna said. "He may never deserve to be, but he is." Clara considered with the learned gravity of the very young, then lifted the mended photograph and held it carefully. Seemed face up, as if fear of breaking things had been taught to her, and she was trying to unlearn it. Michael looked at her. He wanted to say, "I am sorry for everything." And he wanted to say it to 2 children inside, 2 adults, and to a man who waited on benches, and to a woman who danced in kitchens, and to himself, who had sharpened his life down to bone and called it clean. Instead, he said, "You were brave, and meant all of them." "I'm tired," Clara admitted, with a child's permission to be honest. "Sleep," Anna murmured, doing the thing with her hand on her hair again that meant anchors and prayers. "And you are here and I am here, and we will still be here when you wake." "Will you be here?" Clara asked, and the air went thinner. "Yes," Michael said immediately, helplessly, because the word had been waiting in his chest since someone wrote it on the back of a photograph as a dare and a plea. "I'll be here." After she drifted, Anna and Michael sat with the mended picture on the blanket between them, as if it were a fire. "What were you going to do if I hadn't pulled her out?" he asked at last. The question came out without permission, a crack under pressure. "Die," she said calmly, and then smiled small at the way he jerked. "Not literally. I have a second-hand washer that needs me, and 3 houseplants that won't make it without my lectures. But the part of me that is built on keeping her alive," she exhaled.